The billionaire was not asleep. He was watching, testing. In his palace of gold, he lay still, eyes half closed, pretending to rest, while an open safe glittered in the corner, stacks of money piled high, jewels glimmering like stars. It was a trap, a silent question. Would the maid's daughter, that fragile child everyone praised as pure, resist? Or would greed claim her heart? The door creaked open. A little girl stepped in, her tiny hands trembling, her worn shoes tapping softly against the marble floor. She froze at the sight of the fortune, more wealth than she had ever dreamed of. The billionaire's breath slowed, every muscle tense, waiting, measuring, judging. One wrong move, one greedy glance, and her fate would be sealed. But the room was silent, heavy, as if even the walls held their breath. The test had begun, and the truth was about to be revealed. She stood frozen, the vault glimmering before her like a forbidden kingdom. Piles of cash spilled from the safe. Jewels shimmered like stars, gold bars stacked higher than her head. Any thief would have lunged, any liar would have grabbed. But this was no ordinary test. This was the moment the billionaire had prepared for. From the shadows of his feigned slumber, he studied her every breath, every flicker of her eyes. Would temptation break her? Or would innocence prove stronger than greed? The girl's small hand trembled as she reached forward, fingers hovering in the air. The silence of the room tightened, so heavy it threatened to crush her. She whispered under her breath, words too soft for the crowd that did not exist. "It's not mine. It doesn't belong to me." Her voice cracked like fragile glass, yet it carried the weight of mountains. The billionaire's chest tightened. His knuckles whitened against the silk sheets. Every second dragged, every heartbeat roared. The truth of her soul was about to be revealed. The billionaire's eyes, though shut in pretense, burned with anticipation. Every nerve in his body strained to catch. The slightest sound, the creak of the floor, the rustle of bills, the betrayal he half expected. Yet what followed was something he never imagined. The little girl lowered her hand, not toward the wealth, but toward the blanket that covered him. Carefully, gently, she adjusted it over his shoulder, as if protecting him in his false slumber. No greed, no malice, only kindness. She turned, her gaze lingering on the treasure one last time, her lips trembling with words unsaid. Then, with steps as soft as rain, she walked away. The vault remained untouched. The fortune remained whole. But the billionaire's heart was no longer the same. Beneath the mask of sleep, his breath hitched. For the first time in years, shame pierced his pride. The child had passed the test not by resisting, but by proving something money could never buy, purity. Then it happened. The silence shattered, not by the girl's footsteps, but by the sudden scrape of a chair. The billionaire sat up, his eyes blazing, his voice cutting like thunder through the room. "Stop!" The girl froze, her small frame trembling, caught between fear and innocence. Slowly he rose, each movement heavy with the weight of power, the kind that had built empires and broken men. His gaze fell on the untouched fortune, then back to her. For a long, suffocating moment, no one breathed. The guards outside leaned closer to the door, uncertain of what fate awaited her. The billionaire's hand hovered over the mountain of wealth, his knuckles pale, his jaw tight. And then, his lips curled, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous, disbelief. "You had every chance," he whispered, his voice low, raw, almost trembling. "And yet, you chose nothing." The words hung in the air like judgment, heavy, final. For a heartbeat, the room stood still. The billionaire's voice cracked like a whip as he demanded, "Why?" The girl lifted her eyes, steady, unflinching, though her hands shook against her faded dress. "Because what isn't mine, I cannot take," she whispered. The words, simple yet sharp, cut deeper than any accusation. The billionaire staggered back, as if struck by a force greater than wealth, greater than power. His fortune, his empire, his name, all of it seemed to shrink before the honesty of a child. The guards shifted uneasily, shame etched on their faces, unable to meet her gaze. The air thickened, charged with a truth no gold could silence. Slowly, the billionaire sank back into his chair, his eyes wet, his pride unraveling. He had tested her, prepared to expose greed, but instead he had uncovered purity. And for the first time in his life, he bowed, not to kings, not to tycoons, but to a little girl who had nothing, yet proved richer than them all. Then it happened. The silence cracked like glass. One clap, hesitant yet defiant, echoed across the grand hall. Then another, and another, until the room shook with thunderous applause, a storm of hands striking together not out of habit but out of reverence. Men who once sneered now stood, their voices breaking as they shouted, "Honor!" The billionaire remained frozen, head bowed, his chest heaving under the crushing weight of humility. For the first time, he understood. His billions, his empires, his towering pride were nothing compared to the wealth of integrity shining in a child's heart. The girl stood still, her small frame dwarfed by the golden walls around her, yet she towered above them all. She did not smile, she did not bow. Her silence was louder than their cheers, her courage brighter than their riches. And as the applause roared on, one truth settled like fire in every soul present. Greatness is not measured by fortune, but by the choices we make when no one is watching. And then, the impossible happened. The billionaire, once untouchable, once feared, rose slowly to his feet. His body trembled, not from age, but from the weight of truth pressing down on him. The hall fell into silence as his lips parted, every eye locked on him. His voice, once sharp enough to command nations, cracked like brittle glass. "I was wrong," he whispered, each word dripping with shame. The confession cut through the air, heavier than thunder, undeniable as stone. His empire could not shield him. His fortune could not silence his guilt. He turned toward the girl, her gaze steady, her innocence unbroken, and his shoulders bent as though the crown he never wore had shattered. Around him, men who once echoed his arrogance now bowed their heads. For even they knew, power meant nothing here. In that moment, the billionaire was no longer the master of the room. A child pure in heart stood greater than him. And his pride, once his fortress, crumbled into dust. And then, a new voice broke the silence. Not the billionaires, not the crowds, but the janitors. A man no one had ever noticed. A man they had mocked now stood tall as if carved from stone. His uniform was worn, his hands calloused. Yet his presence commanded more respect than the richest man alive. He placed a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes sweeping the room like a storm. And when he spoke, his words struck like fire on cold steel. Strength is not measured in riches. Honor is not bought with gold. True greatness is revealed in the choices we make when no one is watching. The hall trembled. Heads lowered. Even the billionaire's knees bent as his pride collapsed beneath the weight of truth. No wealth could erase the shame. No power could silence the lesson. For in that single moment, a janitor, once invisible, rewrote the meaning of power. And every man present knew they had witnessed greatness. The hall erupted, not with laughter, not with scorn, but with thunderous respect that shook the very walls. Applause crashed like waves, echoing through marble pillars, as men who once sneered now stood with heads bowed, their arrogance stripped away. The billionaire, trembling, could no longer hide behind his fortune. On his knees, voice breaking, he whispered words no one thought possible. "I owe you everything." His empire, his pride, his power, all shattered before the courage of a child who had nothing but honesty in her heart. The little girl did not smile, did not bow. She simply stood, drenched in innocence, her silence louder than the cheers that roared around her. And beside her, the janitor, her father, stood tall, the weight of years lifted at last. That night, the richest man in the room was not the billionaire. It was a maid's daughter who chose truth over temptation and became a legend the world would never forget. The billionaire's chest heaved, his eyes wet with a shame no fortune could wash away. Around him, men who once worshipped his wealth now looked past him, their gazes fixed on the child who had just shattered every illusion of power. She stood small, fragile in frame, yet greater than gold itself. Her silence cut deeper than any speech, her innocence heavier than any crown. The janitor stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder, and in that single gesture the world saw what true strength looked like. Not in marble halls, not in vaults of treasure, but in the bond between father and child. The billionaire lowered his head, his empire crumbling within him, for he knew the truth. He had been tested, and he had failed. But she unarmed, unguarded, untempted, had won. And as the crowd bowed their heads, a legend was born. Greatness was no longer measured in wealth, but in the purity of a little girl's choice.